Hello, welcome to Data Analytics in Business. This is the module on marketing and advertising. I am Frederic Bihan, lecturer at Georgia Tech in Data Analytics, and I'll be your instructor for the next 3 modules that will talk about marketing, advertising, in particular digital advertising. So a little bit of background on me. I am a PhD in mathematics from MIT. Taught at Princeton University for 6 years and then was 10 years at the University of California in San Diego. And also spent about 22 years in business, 6 years in big companies, about 14 years in startups, including creating 3 startups in advertising technologies that were each sold at a profit for investor. And I also done some nonprofit work in healthcare and health awareness. And then I took some time off to get a master's in quantitative and computational finance here at Georgia Tech in the last few years, which helped me become acquainted with this great school where I'm now proud to be teaching you this course. So the learning objectives for this lesson is for you to become more aware of what marketing and advertising is about, and in particular be able to name the 5 main types of traditional advertising. Then we'll also briefly mention the 5 main types of digital advertising, and we'll explain some basic features and differences between them, especially for the methods of buying. So traditional advertising started a long time ago. It may be as ancient as the world is. Some references go back to 868 of the current era when the first books were printed in China, the Diamond Sutra. And they were not brought to the West, but this started the possibility to have mass distribution of information and therefore possibly advertising and messaging for commercial purposes. 1452 was the invention of the Gutenberg press in Germany, initially for religious texts like the Bible. 180 copies made with Johannes Fust, who is not often mentioned, but who was kind of the financial partner of Johannes Gutenberg. In fact, took over the company after Gutenberg unfortunately made it insolvent. So at the beginning, it was sort of a rough time, like so many of the technologies we're going to talk about in this course. Okay, and this is why I'm mentioning this in this historical context. For the next few years, the printing press was distributed to Italy, France, Spain, England, and you can see that in the space of about 110 years, there was worldwide printing press technology available. Now, what is remarkable, and I want to mention here, is that these technological advances also brought some social challenges and social changes. In particular, for the Catholic Church at the time in Europe, Pope Alexander VI declared that printing required the permission of the Church. So it was viewed as a very powerful, very potent method of disseminating information for the Pope to say, not everybody can start printing anything they want. And sure enough, 19 years later, Martin Luther in Germany and then Calvin in Switzerland started the reform ideas and distributing them in this method. So they printed letters of complaints to the church and distributed them, and it created the Protestant movement. So it shows you how powerful a new technology for messaging can be to create such a rapid change. 100, 110 years may not be quick to you, but still it is very powerful. And this is why we need to pay attention to it, because the changes are continuing to happen with technology. So what are the traditional methods of advertising? The 5 main ones are listed here on the slide, and let me talk to you a little bit about each of them. First, we have outdoor displays and promotions. What we mean by that is these billboards you see on the side of the road, as well as street teams of people distributing pamphlets or brochures about a political candidate or about a meeting or about a strike that they may have. So outdoor display advertising has been around for quite a while and is still in existence today. Second one is the one I just mentioned in my historical slide, is about print. Newspapers, and then later on, once binding became fairly easy to do industrially, even for small businesses, magazines arrived. So printing, took care of display advertising for probably 100 years through the 1800s until early 1900. And inserted in all of this was also the idea of mailing and doing direct messaging. So we all know that we receive a ton of mail that we've not asked for. There's two types of mail that are used by advertisers. There's the addressed mail and the unaddressed mail. The unaddressed mails may be coupons from grocery stores that come to you and don't even have your name on them. They are just for whoever lives in that house. The addressed mail is the mail that is, of course, directed to you because somehow you sign up for a mailing list when you accepted a certain discount at a department store, for instance. So this started as soon as the post office opened here in the US, which was one of the legacies of Ben Franklin. The first post office that I could find in research started in Persia, even before the current era. Then we have radio. And radio started with Marconi in the period of 1895 to 1902. And radio became commercial in the early 20th century. And as you know, it was extremely powerful to the point that some major regime change, like unfortunately the Nazi regime in Germany, rely a lot on radio addresses to disseminate their messages and to get populations to follow their lead. So that's another major change that happened in society because of what happened in technology of mass communications. Finally, television arrived gradually. 1911, Boris Rosing in Russia. Philo Farnsworth was in California, in San Francisco, and started showing the possibility of sending images over airwaves, moving images in particular. And Vladimir Zworykin was actually a Russian person, but who lived in the US since a very young age. And he sort of competed with Philo Farnsworth for the origin of television. He didn't publish his research right away. There was some discussion of whether he had really invented his patents in 1923. And in fact, there was a big patent war between him and Philo Farnsworth because Philo did get a patent, and therefore NBC, for whom Vladimir Zworykin ended up working, was forced to license the television patents from Philo Farnsworth. But then NBC made it extremely commercial, extremely popular, and started the process of selling ad spots, advertising spots. So what are the traditional ways by which television advertising is sold? And to a large extent, radio advertising is sold in the same fashion, and to some extent also print. So the traditional method of buying and selling advertising is the cost per thousand method. CPM really stands for cost per mil, M being the Roman numeral for 1,000. So it doesn't stand for cost per million, as some people think, but cost per thousand impressions or views. So it counts the number of thousands of people who are watching a certain program or an ad on the program. Typically, you distribute your universe into subgroups, and Nielsen in the US is the company that provides the ratings for the shows on TV. And I've written here typical age breakdowns that they use. 13 to 17-year-old for youth advertising, 18 to 24 for young people, young adults, 25 to 34, 35 to 54 years old, 55 plus, and then a wide range panel of 18 to 49 years old. So in each of these age categories, you can count the number of people that you are hoping will watch your program and therefore watch the advertising. And when you're buying or selling advertising, you're trying to sell these demographics, as they are called, to the advertising buying your ads. So to go into a little more details about how TV advertising works, we have to talk about the method of rating. So what is a rating? A rating is really a percentage on the number of people who have their television sets tuned to a particular program. So in this example, let's say we have 10 houses in our universe, and 3 of them are watching channel 2, 2 are watching channel 3, 1 is watching channel 4. So we would say the rating of a particular program at a certain time, and potentially in a certain demographic of ages, is a 3 out of 10 because we have 3 homes out of the 10 that could potentially watch this program. So we have a 30 rating. Now the share is something slightly different. That is counting the number of people who are watching TV right now and seeing among those how many are watching this particular channel 2. So you can see that the share at this time for channel 2 is actually 50% of the audience who is currently watching TV. And finally, the HUT, household using television, is the overall number of homes that are watching TVs at this time. So these 3 numbers, HUT, rating, and share, are used a lot in television advertising sales, and they are explained here. Notice at the bottom of the slide a link that takes you to a blog that I found quite interesting to read, and it's not that long, that you may want to visit to get more details. Now, once you have your method of rating, in traditional broadcast advertising in particular, in certain markets, remembering that a large territory, like say the United States or any large country, will have multiple markets because traditionally a television market is limited to one DMA, direct marketing organization or area. And therefore, what we would do is sell a certain number of GRPs, or gross rating points, as they're called. So a gross rating point is what exactly? It's taking through a certain schedule of, let's say, a week, what was the rating each day for the programs in which I inserted ads. So in particular case here, we have 10 homes, again like before, and let's say we're only looking at channel 2, and the first home is watching channel 2 on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. The next one is watching on Mondays and Thursday. Third one on Wednesdays and Fridays. And so you're adding the ratings for each night to your program, and therefore for the whole week you may end up with a total number of gross rating points of say 150. Then you associate a certain price to your gross rating points, and you may have I would say a gross price for your advertising. Then another method that's very important to look at is the reach, because advertisers like to be the biggest kid on the block somehow, the one that everybody is watching. If you can advertise in a superstar program, like say the Super Bowl or some hit TV shows, you will be seen by a large number of population in a particular market. So the reach is counting overall for that week how many TVs were watching TV. How many homes were watching TV? In this case, there were 7 homes watching TV, and maybe the other 3 were on vacation or traveling or didn't use their TV sets. So your gross rating points overall delivered a reach of 70. And the fraction of GRPs divided by the reach is considered the average frequency for how many people will see my spots, how many times they will see my spots. So we'll have here a gross rating point of 150 divided by a reach of 70, delivering a frequency of 2.1. Now, it's a good place to potentially remind you, if you haven't taken a marketing course before, that what marketers tend to look for is ways to influence people to change their behavior, to go buy one brand of shoes versus the other. So how do you do that? How do you get people to change their behavior? And the analogy I like to take, is if you have kids at home, or if you remember what it was like to be a kid when your parents would call you to come to dinner, first there is, did you hear the voice of your parents calling you for dinner? Second, how long did they call you for dinner? Was it just, hey, come on now? Or did they describe the whole thing that was for dinner, which would be the duration part? And the third one is the frequency. How many times did they recall that dinner was ready, you should come down? So reach, duration, and frequency are sort of three of the key factors that are sought after by advertisers and marketers to influence behavior. And it's traditionally known that for a human being to do something, to change buying habits or to start buying a new product, they would have to be exposed to a message for about 7 times, okay? Within a certain period of time, potentially of 1 month, 2 months, okay? But so reach, duration, and frequency help you figure out if you've reached that 7th time messaging to the individuals and to how many individuals in the market. All right, now people have studied the effects of advertising in public relations. And I wanted to summarize here some research that is extremely interesting to look at, and hopefully we'll be able to expand in some of the future modules on marketing, is understanding the effects of marketing and advertising on changing people's behavior. I mentioned the rule of 7 as sort of a crude rule for influencing people to change behavior, but since the early 1900s, people have been researching what does it take for people to do something. And one of the first places where this was extremely important in the United States was to decide whether the US should go to war in World War I in Europe. At that time, there was not yet a Nazi threat like there was in Second World War. A lot of people in the US felt we don't have to get involved in war in Europe. And yet people in government, including President Woodrow Wilson, thought, no, we have to get the public opinion to start caring about what's going on in Europe, partly because it could be very good for economic interest of the US to sell more products in Europe. So he created the Committee on Public Information, also called the Creel Commission, because of the chairman of that committee was called Creel. And they were successful in getting the US to start participating in the war. Towards the very end of the war, as you can see from the dates. Now, this was followed by some work by a person named Walter Lippmann, who wrote a book on public opinion, 1922. Very fascinating book, where the belief of the people at the time was that overall a society was made of a few leaders and a lot of sheeps. And the sheep had to be led because they couldn't really think for themselves, so you had to think for them. So Edward Bernays continued this further in his book Propaganda, 1928. Now what's very interesting to know about Bernays is that he was actually the nephew of Sigmund Freud. And he was a person who had, through his family, a lot of information about psychoanalysis and psychiatry even. And in some ways what he did is apply some of the ideas of his uncle to mass communication. And one of his successes early on is that he was hired by tobacco companies to increase their market share. At that time, there was a population of men who were smoking cigarettes, and almost no women were smoking. And so Edward Bernays researched the problem and realized, if we make the gesture of smoking equivalent to sort of a declaration of freedom, then we're going to get women to start smoking. And they created some ads and some public relation campaigns to encourage women to assert their independence by, lighting up cigarette and smoking. And it worked. A lot of women started smoking. The cigarette companies went up. Now, this shows also the two-edged sword of this, because, of course, smoking 50 years later was discovered to be a terrible thing for people to do, all people. And this shows also the danger, potentially, of these tools of advertising, marketing, and propaganda in disseminating information that can be false or untrustworthy. Since then, the word public relations has become the modern word for sort of propaganda. But in those days, propaganda was the word being used for what is now public relations. So Torches of Freedom was the big campaign that Edward Bernays launched in 1929. And you can continue reading through the literature. For the next 50 years, a lot of research was done on trying to understand, quantify, what is the effect of advertising, until the internet arrived in the 1990s. 1994 was when, the first navigator for the World Wide Web was really disseminated, and leads us into digital advertising. One last book I wanted to mention on the effects of advertising from the psychological viewpoint is the book called Biology, which is a great title. It's spelled B-U-Y-ology, by Martin Lidstrom, who is an author and researcher in the field of neuromarketing and small data. In other words, the idea that a small amount of change, potentially in an election, 1 or 2%, if you can change the mind of 1 or 2% of people, you can actually flip an election to the other side. So if you want to read further, I would encourage you to look up the documentary The Great Hack, that we may put the link here for people to watch. It's a Netflix 1-hour documentary on the Cambridge Analytica work in Brexit and the US election of 2016. With that said, what is happening in digital advertising? So the 5 main methods there are display advertising, search engine marketing, social media marketing, mobile advertising, and direct messaging / email marketing. So I'll give you a quick overview now, and we'll go into a little more details later. Display advertising are the banner ads that you see across your page when you go, for instance, to a newspaper website or a TV station website. They're sometimes across the page, sometimes a little block on the right or the left. So they are sold typically on a CPM basis, like we saw earlier for TV ads, and they are really made for awareness. Then we have search engine marketing, which is tapping into the intention people have to find something. I'm looking for a new pair of shoes. I'm looking for a new TV set. I'm looking for a new car. Okay, so I search for something. Now I'm being served a text ad, typically, which is positioned above or on the side of the free results. And people buy these ads on a cost per click basis, so that they're shown for free, but if people click on them, then you pay a fairly large price, which is typically, close, I would say, to what you would pay in CPM basis. So we'll get to the click-through ratio later on. Social media marketing is all the ads you may see in Facebook or in Instagram or even in Twitter, the sponsored links, the sponsored posts. A big evolution in this. It's a market that started, less than 15 years ago when Facebook was founded, and in fact, It was most likely in the last 10 years that it really expanded a lot, since 2008 or so. Now it's become extremely important for all brands to have a strong social media marketing strategy. And mobile advertising is the new method that, thanks to our smartphones that are now ubiquitous and in fact more popular than TV sets or cars, you see ads on your mobile phone, sometimes at the top of the screen or the bottom of the screen. Very creative methods of displaying ads at times. And they can also be micro-targeted to the location where you are, so that as you're passing by a store, it may tell you, hey, would you like to write a review for this restaurant since you ate there last week? Okay. Finally, email marketing, direct messaging is also extremely important. We won't emphasize it as much because it's perhaps a little more of a public relation type form of messaging and communications. But it's extremely powerful and efficient if you can build a big mailing list and continue to email them regularly. So we look at this in the next module. And to summarize where we are with this one, you should try to remember, that advertising started thousands of years ago. It has evolved, and each time a major technology happened, like the printing press or radio or television or social media marketing, there were social change that happened soon after that. And that shows, the power of marketing and advertising in our society. We have traditional method of advertising that typically don't include a response mechanism right away, like television or radio, where you may hear an ad, but you can't respond through the medium. You have to pick up a phone or go to a store to respond to it, really, or mail something. In digital advertising, also called interactive advertising, you have built-in methods of response. And we saw the 5 main ones that we'll detail in greater details in the next few modules. So 1900, we started understanding the influence of advertising on forming opinions and changing opinions. And we're still researching these. We have great work, for instance, also like the Nobel Prize of Turkey and Kahneman for thinking fast and thinking slow, a book that talks about the two systems of making decisions that most human beings have, sort of an analytical method of decision or an emotional method of decisions. Thank you.